Whether you call it Road Plus, 27.5, or 650B, the bike industry at large has finally embraced the idea of a supple, wider, faster, and more comfortable tire. In my opinion, there's been one person in particular that's kept the notion of bikes like this alive for over the last decade, and that person is Heine. He's a publisher of a very well-known underground, if you will, bicycling magazine called Bicycle Quarterly, as well as the founder of Compass Bicycles, the producers of all those super supple tires we love. In this episode of PLPTalks, we're going to talk about the origins of Bicycle Quarterly, his concept of planing, finally explained, and where he hopes Bicycle Quarterly and Compass Bicycles will go from here. So this interview, like all the previous interviews, is made possible by listeners and viewers just like you. So if you're enjoying this content, consider being a monthly subscriber. And this episode is also supported by Whitefish Bike Retreat. Learn more about them at whitefishbikeretreat.com. It's truly a magical place that caters to bike packers, bike tourists, mountain bikers, and gravel cyclists. You can either camp outside on their property or stay in one of their private rooms or bunk rooms. The Whitefish Bike Retreat also has a full-on bike repair area, as well as a small shop that lets you rent and buy bike packing gear, so you can try before you buy. And there's also an amazing network of single track on property that connects to the larger Whitefish single track network. So if you're passing through on your Great Divide journey, or if you're just looking for a bikey place to base camp, definitely check out the Whitefish Bike Retreat. And with all that said, let's jump right in. So put on those earbuds, pretend like you're working at your desk, and enjoy the show. So everyone, welcome Jan. How's it going?
Thanks, I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. So I think one reason I really wanted to have you on the show is I feel like you've been one of the most influential people in the contemporary bike culture in terms of how we think of tire width and what's, a performance bike. And I feel like it really started with Bicycle Quarterly. And you've had that now for 15 years. What's the how and the why of starting BQ?
That's a good question. First of all, I think you're too kind. I mean, we've really not done that much. We've built upon the work of a lot of other people. How it all started. I was writing for other magazines and sort of researching all these stories, and I became fascinated by the French cyclotourists and randonneurs because, first of all, I've always enjoyed riding long distances. I've always wondered sort of how much further can you go and what's on the other side of the mountain. And so I discovered that people have been doing this for more than 100 years. There was this great guy in France, Vélocieux, who said, let's do a challenge. How far can we ride in 40 hours? And these people, all his readers, he had a magazine too. And the readers wrote back and said, I went to the top of Mont Ventoux and back. And the next guy, I said, I went, and it's all these places. This was long before the Tour de France ever went over a mountain pass. And so they really inspired me. And then I discovered that the bikes that they developed also were just awesome. Like we were thinking about gravel roads. And I said to my friend Mark, who said, let's go on gravel roads. I said, I don't want to ride a mountain bike from my house to the gravel road because that's like 40, 60 miles or something. And so we just stayed on the paved roads, and I was racing at the time, 21 millimeter tubulars, and you don't go on gravel roads with that. And then I bought this old French bike, a Joe Routons, that was made for the Alps in 1952. And back then the roads were all half paved, half gravel. So it was sort of the all-road bike that we needed. And suddenly I had a bike that I could take from my house to the mountains and then go on gravel roads and come back. And it totally opened up a new world of riding.
Mm-hmm. So how was that?
And the magazine, how it started?
Yeah.
Go ahead. So.
Yeah. So
I answered a different question, I think.
That's fine. So how long before that did you start the magazine?
The magazine started in between, sort of. What happened was I had these great stories. I went to France. I talked to these builders. Like the first guy I talked to was Ernest Trukov, Alex Singer. And I thought, what am I going to do with this stuff? I really need to tell this. This was before the internet and everything. So it's not like you could just put up a website. So the thought was to just start a newsletter for a few friends and sort of Xerox it, and just send it around and everybody can sort of comment and so on. And it was Grant Peterson who put in the Rivendell Reader a note. I wrote some articles for him, and under one article, I put, well, I'm starting this newsletter. If you're interested, send $24. I had 140 subscribers before I had even put the first word to paper.
Wow.
I thought Xeroxing isn't going to work here. So that's how it started, and it just took off from there.
Right.
After the first year, we had 700 subscribers, and now we're almost 6,000.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
So yeah.
Was there a certain time when you noticed like a really growth spike in the magazine, or has it been like kind of slow and steady?
It's been steady.
Yeah.
You know, there has been, I mean, there's always little spikes when we have a great story, like the Concours de Machine, the technical trials last year. That was a big, big thing that a lot of people got really excited about, where we worked with Peter Weigel, built a super light bike and so on. But overall, it's just slow and steady.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like I first encountered the magazine about 9 or 10 years ago. It was a friend of mine who, had a Rivendell, he had a stack of, bicycling and Bicycle Quarterly, and it just blew my mind, like, to see, like, this different kind of bike that wasn't being spoken about. And I think what's so cool is, I think it was last year I was watching the GCN show, and they referenced your show, and I think they were talking about, your studies in tire width, and it's like, whoa, it's really kind of made, like, a leap to a somewhat larger audience.
It's really exciting because the same joys that we found in our riding, we wanted to share that. And now more and more people, like we went riding last weekend, and for the first time on this gravel road in the hills, we saw a bunch of cyclists come the other way. And it was not just one or two, it was 15. It's just like, whoa, and we've been going there for 15 years now. And it's just great to see other people enjoying the same kind of stuff.
Right. Cool. Well, I think one of the very first concepts that I was introduced about from you was the idea of planing, which I guess a lot of people have some difficulty with. Can you explain it in video?
In video. Well, what happened was, the world was sort of split into these two camps about frame stiffness. Some people said stiffer is better, and any ounce of or any millimeter of flex is energy wasted that doesn't go to the rear wheel. And then there were the sort of more scientific types like Jim Papadopoulos and so on, who said, there isn't that much energy going into the frame. It doesn't get hot. It can't be important. Mm-hmm. So I sort of subscribed to the scientific guys and said, it can't matter. If people raced on Vituses and Elans and won, sprints like Sean Kelly, all these frames are stiff enough for me. Mm-hmm. We left it at that.
So planing basically,
suddenly we got this. Go ahead.
So okay, just describe the concept of how energy input in a frame flex works.
But what we found was that it's not that frame flex is detrimental. It actually can be beneficial. And I think people have known that for a long time. But what happens is that the rider's power output is not fixed. So it's not like you have 500 watts and, if you have a flexible frame, 450 arrive at the rear wheel. If you have a stiff frame, 490 arrive at the rear wheel. But what actually is happening is that your power output could be 550 watts on one bike and 450 on another. And it's just like when you think about like a pole vaulter. If that pole doesn't flex, they're not going to go anywhere. And so it's more like how much energy do you have and how much can you produce? And what we found in our studies is that if the frame flex is just right, you can put in more energy in the downstroke, which is where all the energy is put into the bike. Mm-hmm. And then as the frame springs back, if it does it at the right time, it actually helps propel the bike forward. Mm-hmm. And so the perfect frame is one that allows you to push really hard on the downstroke and then stores that energy for a quarter pedal stroke and smooths out your pedal stroke when you hit the bottom.
Cool. So is there a relationship then between, say, like rider weight and planing? Like would that...
I think absolutely.
Yeah.
I think rider weight, it's cadence, it's also how much power you put out. Like when we did our testing, we actually had 4 bikes built that were identical except different frame tubing so that we could have a stiffer one. We had 2 more flexible ones because we wanted to have a control. As you do in scientific experiment, you can't just have one because otherwise something else could be messing up your whatever alignment or who knows what. And then we had an oversized bike. And we had 3 testers. And there was one who couldn't tell the difference because they were all actually very close together. There was one who always was faster on the more flexible bike. And then there was one who was a little bit stronger, who was sort of in between. He could make both bikes work well. So clearly the power output matters. And I think we see that, especially in the past, when it was very easy to make different bikes for racers in the times of steel bikes, where in the 60s, a lot of racers had two race bikes. One for the stage races or for the road races, which was stiffer, because a road race, you really win in a few accelerations. Mm-hmm. So it's like super high power output for 40 seconds, and then you have your break or you don't, or the final sprint and so on. And for time trials, they used a much more flexible bike, because there you're riding at the same power output for the whole time. And so when I realized that, I thought, they were onto something, those guys.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So I'm curious about so you've branched out into bike components in the last couple of years. When did you make that decision, and why?
We never made the decision. No. It just happened. How it all started was when we did Bicycle Quarterly. We had all these contacts all over the world, and so we found this great book about Vélociaux in France that a good friend published, and we said, well, you can't get it in the US. How about we order it for our readers? How about a Japanese book about Reniers? And so on. And so slowly we started building this program of stuff that you couldn't get. Mm-hmm. And then we discovered these French bikes, and the old riders all told us, there used to be these tires. You wouldn't believe it. These awesome tires. They were like high-end racing tires, but they were like 42 millimeters wide. And you would think they'd be slow, but they weren't. They were super fast. And I thought, I need those tires. Well, how do you get those tires? First we did some studies, and we thought, okay, we studied and we showed that wider tires can be as fast. The bike industry will immediately make those tires because it's obvious. Well, guess what?
No.
It didn't. So then we figured, if we want these tires, we need to make them ourselves. So we worked with people in Japan, Pan-Racer, and we started introducing tires because we said, well, we know how to make these tires. We know exactly. Pan-Racer knows how to make tires, but we know what we want from those tires. So we go to them and we say, well, can you use the casing for your high-end tubulars? Mm-hmm. And can you make it 42 millimeters wide? And at first they said, well, why would you want to do that? And I said, well, because we believe that these tires can be as fast and, ride over rough terrain and back roads and so on. So that's really interesting. Let's try. Mm-hmm. And so other things followed, and it's mostly just we want to ride stuff on our own bikes, and nobody makes it. And so then we start making it. Sometimes we make one-offs, but usually it's easier to just, plus once I show something on the blog or in the magazine, everybody wants it.
Right.
So it's like, I bought a pair of cyclotouring knickers in Japan, and I started wearing them because I thought, it's just much nicer to be a little more dressed when you go into like a rural grocery store and you're not like this sort of curiosity.
Right.
And then everybody said, where can I get those? I said, well, you need to go to Japan and shop. Well, that wasn't so useful. So then I thought we should just make them. So we're working with a local shop here in Seattle who sews them here in Seattle for us. And that's how a lot of these projects have started. It's cool. Usually just stuff we do ourselves.
Yeah, awesome. So when you first went to Pan-Racer, did you have a tire design, or did you say, I like this component from this tire and the tread on this tire, put it together? Or did you have like historical examples of tires you were pulling from?
It was a combination of everything. And then we also talked to them and say, these are the attributes we want. How can we get that? And they say, oh, how about this? They have engineers who know a lot of stuff about how to make it, but you need to ask the right question of those guys. Mm-hmm. If you say, I want a super puncture resistant tire that I can ride through hell and broken glass and nails, they'll make that for you. But the question always is like one thing that nobody really realized was that tire pressure doesn't affect your speed. I think that was the most revolutionary thing we found in our testing. And it was just really simple. We wanted to find out, how much do we give up if we lower the pressure a little bit? Because when we ride, say you ride Paris-Brest Paris, that's 765 miles. If you don't get beat up, it's perfectly fine to lose a little energy. Mm-hmm. And we thought, where is that perfect point where we're starting, like the kink in the curve, where, let's say, at 110 psi, we might be 1% faster, but at 95 psi, we're 10% more comfortable. So we're willing to give up 1% speed for 10% comfort. But what we found out is we're not giving up any speed. We're just like, this can't be. So we tested it. We tested with different methods. We tested with different tires. But basically, the bike goes, wobbling all over the place before it gets slower.
Right.
So it becomes unrideable before you lose actual speed.
Huh.
And when we realized that, it's sort of the whole conundrum of why tires disappeared. Because in the past, it was always, we know in theory a wider tire is faster. But in practice, a wider tire cannot support high pressures because it's the casing under more stress. So you need to make the casing stronger, which makes the tire slower, or you need to run it at lower pressures, which we thought made the tire slower. Mm-hmm. But once we found out you can ride the tire at lower pressures and not be slower, that opened up the whole world. We said, well, we can make the casing not stronger and just reduce the pressure. And now I'm riding, 40 psi, 35 psi, and I'm easily keeping up with guys, on racing bikes with 23 millimeter tires pumped up to 115 psi or so. Mm-hmm. I wish I knew that when I was racing. Man, it would have been so much more fun.
Why do you think it took so long to kind of question these kind of preconceptions that we had in terms of tire pressure?
There's a very powerful placebo effect. When you pump up the tire harder, it changes the frequency of the vibrations of the bike. It makes a higher frequency. But when you go faster, you also get a higher frequency because, you cover more ground for the same amount of time. So you hit the little irregularities faster. So pumping up your tires harder makes the bike feel faster without actually going faster. That's cool. I discovered that once I was riding with my friend Mark, and I had done some testing 2 days before, and I had forgotten to let the air out of the tires. I had pumped up these 30 millimeter tires to 120 psi, which, it was dangerous, but, we sort of take some risks sometimes. So I'm riding next to him, and I'm saying, we're going quite a bit faster than we're usually going. He is the one who has a computer on his bike. He looks down and says, nope. So what you mean? So we always go 19 miles an hour here, but it feels faster. Mm-hmm. And then I remembered, I still have 120 psi in my tires. So I stopped, let out the air of the tires, and then we're back to normal speed.
Yeah. Cool. So you've had the chance to test a lot of the bikes for Bicycle Quarterly. What's been the hardest test bike to return?
Well, there's one I didn't return. I bought.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily that was the best. There's so many great bikes. And I just returned one that we'll have in the spring issue that I wish I could have kept.
Yeah.
Usually, the Firefly behind me, I bought it because I wanted a bike like that. I wanted a modern race bike, but with really wide tires. And so I kept it.
Yeah.
There's some other ones which are just as great, but already have a bike like it, so there's no need, And many of the bikes we get, sometimes the builders, especially small builders, they can't just build a bike for us, so it's a customer's bike, so it's already spoken for. That's actually the hardest one to test, because if we find something that's not so great about it, the customer hasn't even ridden the bike
yet. Yeah. Well, do you have any production bikes that you really liked in your testing?
Well, depends on what is production. We thought the Open UP was a pretty cool bike, but of course costs the same as most custom bikes. There were some surprising ones. There was a Breezer city bike that actually planed. It had a aluminum frame that wasn't very oversized. It was great fun sprinting from traffic light to traffic light here in Seattle. So it's how to say, I guess it's like so many things at that price point. Nobody really pays that much attention to the finer details. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't.
Mm-hmm. So when you get a bike to test, how do you cleanse your palette so you have kind of like an empty space to feel all the aspects of the bike?
You just get on it and ride. Yeah. Usually we switch the tires because tires sort of change the feel of the bike so much, and they're so easy to change. So we just put the same tires, in different widths, but on every bike. so that we're not testing tires, because you put something like a puncture resistant Schwalbe Marathon on any bike and it'll feel totally different. But beyond that, you just go for a ride, and usually, especially when you ride with friends, you're talking not about bikes, about anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so you sort of forget the whole bike thing, and the bike intrudes when it does things that you don't expect. Or you never notice the bike and you say, man, this is a great bike. We just rode 75 miles, and not once did I think about the bike. So it's sort of, the best bike is the one that you don't notice. And people sometimes think, because we focus so much about bikes and technology, that we're constantly thinking about bikes. But I think about my bike when I'm not riding, so that I don't have to think about it when I'm riding.
Right.
The worst bike is one that breaks down. Suddenly you're stopped.
Right.
I mean, it's impossible to forget the bike at that point.
Yeah.
But the bike that, where you go up a hill and suddenly your friend who usually rides the same pace is pulling away on his bike, saying, well, what's happening? So then you switch bikes. Fortunately, we're the same height and same power output. And suddenly I'm pulling away, and you say, wait a minute, there's something here that clearly, we're both putting out more power on that bike than this bike, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the first time we really thought about planing was when we had this test bike. Neither of us liked it. It was a racing bike. Color scheme was definitely not our taste. They sent it to us completely unassembled, so it was a pain to build up. I mean, if I ever didn't like a bike,
mm-hmm.
it was probably that.
Yeah.
And then I was riding and I thought, it feels faster than usual. But of course, I didn't tell Mark when he wrote it that I thought that, because I don't want to bias him. So we're riding and we're going up this hill, and I'm thinking, I'm going to test him. I'm going to accelerate really hard in 2 stages. First once, because there's psychology involved. And it's all these games. We're good friends. It's not like, we're trying to beat each other. It's more like when you play Monopoly or something, you want to come first, but right. It's not, not because you don't like the other guy. And I look back after the second acceleration, and my friend's not there anymore. And I'm thinking, whoa, that bike is not as fast as I thought. And then I realize he's actually passing me in my blind spot. I'm looking to the left, and he's passing me on the right. And he's gone. I'm just thinking, I don't like getting beaten. And this is my own bike that I'm riding. And, I'm very proud of my bike. And I don't want it to get beaten. And we get to the top, and Mark says, this bike's really fast. And I say, I think you're right. So then we weigh his bike down, we switch bikes, and it doesn't matter. It's like, it was clear we were both putting out way more power on that bike, no matter how hard we tried on the other one.
Oh,
and then we both realized we need new bikes.
Nice. So it's been, the last couple of years have been really interesting in terms of, I guess, more mass-produced bikes, because we're seeing kind of bike design shift to taking wider tires, 650B. So what do you think of this trend? I mean, I feel like BQ definitely had like a hand in at least like carrying the torch for other people to get excited about it.
It's really, really cool. I'm super excited about it, because in the past, readers contacted us and said, hey, what can I do? Where can I find a bike? And at first we said, it's easy. You go to France, you find a 1952 Jorotons, and then you need to dig up some tires, because nobody is making 650B tires. But there's a company in Japan called Mitsubishi that still makes some decent ones, but they just went out of production. So,
so good luck.
You get the idea. Exactly. And then we said, hey, there are now these custom builders in the US like Mitch Pryor and Peter Weigel and so on who make these bikes. You only need to wait 2 years, and you need on the deposit, and so on and so on. If you really know what you want, that's great. You get a bike that's incredibly wonderful. It's like a custom tailored suit or something. It's something that you can't buy usually. And with bikes, it's amazing that actually somebody like me can afford that. I could never afford a custom built house or custom made car or whatever. But still, most people want to go to a bike shop, test ride 5 bikes, and then ride one home. And you can do that now. There's some really good ones. I'm really, really excited about that, because, in the past, people had the choice between a hybrid and a racing bike and a mountain bike. And you just thought, well, what if we could get the best of all of those into one bike? And now we have that.
Yeah, that's been my favorite thing about this whole adventure bike, gravel bike trend. It is like the best of all bikes. You don't have to choose between like a pure stiff road race machine or like an extreme mountain bike machine. or a really slow hybrid. Just there's something that, it's kind of like the jack of all trades bicycle.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how I was just talking to my friend Mark about that, how when he spec'd his first custom bike, he thought he would have a bike where he can take parts off, put them on, the fenders come off easily, he can switch tires, he can switch everything. And he realized, I don't need that. So his next bike was one where nothing ever changes, but he can do everything with it.
Mm-hmm. I'm almost scared that the bike industry will leave this golden age and, build super specialized bikes again. So I want to like stockpile and hoard all the components and tires while they're in vogue.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, bike industry is completely unpredictable. I agree with you. Nobody knows. Maybe it's time trial bikes next.
So what's been your most favorite accomplishment that you've had with the magazine and with the component part of the business?
Oh, that's a hard question. I don't know. I think hearing from people, there was one reader who wrote to us and said, Bicycle Quarterly has changed the way I enjoy cycling with my wife. Mm-hmm. And or my wife and I or something. But, so just people going out there and pushing their boundaries and inspiring them to not be limited by anything except their imagination. And that can be broadened. I think that's the most wonderful part, that, the bike doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. So I had a question from one of our Instagram followers, and he asked, do you have any time to sleep? It seems like you're producing media, going overseas, creating components. Like, does it just like consume your daily life?
It can get pretty busy. But, I'm really lucky that part of my job is to write about bike rides and to test bike components and to think about them. So at least I must ride my bike. So yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. I mean, certainly if you don't enjoy it, it's not a career I would recommend.
Is there any bike trend that you're excited about that you see down the road?
I'm really excited that the narrow tire racing bike is being replaced by the all-road bike. And I'm really excited that people take it really seriously now. At first it was like, oh, well, we're going to make you some sort of heavy touring bike that, that you can put the kitchen sink on. And those are great bikes and those are necessary bikes. But I'm really excited now when you look at, what Open is doing, or 3T with their Explorer or stuff, where you get a full-on race bike, 18 pounds carbon fiber that can take 48 millimeter tires. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of the dream that we had. I remember we talked about all-road bikes in 2007. We said we're envisioning this new breed of bikes, like we were saying, that combines the best of everything. And that's happening now. And I don't think that's going to ever go away, because it's just like the mountain bike. It's stuck around for, so long because it feels neat. I think the all-road bike even more really fills a need. And I don't think people will forget again that the wide tires can be as fast as narrow ones.
Right. I hope not. Yeah, I forget who. It might have been Grant who said, like, if you like something, buy like a lot of it, because you never know when it's going to go back out of style.
That's a pessimistic view. I think the opposite is the case. I did stockpile on some things, and they're lying unused in the basement because we have way better stuff now.
Yeah.
I mean, there was sort of, back when I got into it too, there was this whole feeling of, oh, steel frames are going away. We thought even spoked wheels would go away, Spinergies and whatnot. And look where we're now. Mm-hmm. We have everything. I mean, you can even buy a Renair's crank again, which sort of, when I started, I thought, it'd be so nice to have one of those on my bike. And of course it's not going to happen,
Right.
Of course it can happen. Otherwise we just have to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's cool, like how, it sounds like you started Bicycle Quarterly because you needed an outlet for this interest, and it just drew other interested people together and then created a demand. So it kind of, facilitated, the production of, tires and components for that interest. It's been a pretty cool cycle to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun because it's also great for us because we don't need to do marketing. We don't even, the product development is riding through the mountains saying, oh, we could improve this. Usually it's like on day 3 of a long trip, where you think, oh, this could be improved. Sometimes something breaks and you say, oh, Why did it break? Oh, now I understand why they didn't do it this way in the past, and stuff like that. So that means we can spend all our money on making better products, and still make them relatively affordably. And I think that's a huge advantage over, say, a traditional company that has a bunch of marketing guys and needs to do focus groups. Where are the trends heading? We don't care where the trends are heading. We're thinking, what do we need? What do other people need for the type of riding that we enjoy?
What's the kind of the R&D to finished product cycle look like for you? Like the length of time it takes from, oh, I have this idea to seeing it in fruition?
It all depends. Sometimes it can be a decade. Like the Renair's cranks, for example, we thought about, and then we said, well, what can we do? And then we got some estimates, and we said, yeah, we could probably do this. And then we thought, well, let's do some other projects first, and so on. And then we thought about, well, what could we do better? Because there are things that they couldn't do in the past. Like we curved our crank arms a little bit to give you a little more heel clearance. Incredibly difficult to make a forging die that's not straight in the old days before computer modeling. Now it's same cost, same whatever. So of course we did that. Small things like that. There's a lot of testing. You can test in the lab. We do that. And you get 100,000 cycles in 3 days, which is great. But are those cycles really what's happening on the road is a question that nobody really knows. So then you test it on the road too, and that takes a while. We can't ride 10,000 miles in a weekend.
Yeah. So do you guys have any interesting new products coming down the pipeline that you can talk about?
It's sort of, we have a lot of things that we're thinking about. Then we develop them all in parallel, and then at some point they come to the fore. I think the exciting part is the 11-speed chainrings that we are introducing. We introduced the 4630, and our goal was to make the shifting as good as the best in the world, because putting rams and pins in the chainring is very, very easy, unless you really want to do it right. And then it's incredibly difficult because it's a complicated system, and it's a dynamic system. Like, many makers wrap the chain around the crank beautifully, and you can, put it on your workbench and you say, oh, this is how it works, until you pedal at 90 RPM, and then it doesn't work so well anymore. Right. And then you look at the best guys, and it doesn't work on the workbench, but it works out in the field because they are taking those things into consideration. And so that was a big project, and we're excited. There will be some other chainring combinations, of course. That was just the first one we introduced. We also like to introduce things one by one, so that if we can improve it, next one can be better. And then at some point, the first one might be phased out, rather than investing in tooling for 5 of them and then realizing, oh, we could have. Although with this one, there isn't anything yet that we think should be better. So
yeah, cool. So where do you see Bicycle Quarterly going in the future?
Well, we always try to keep it fresh and exciting. So our goal is to think about what we can do that's new, that brings something different to the table, that excites and inspires people. Because our goal is not for somebody to sit in their armchair and just say, oh, wow, that's so cool. But more like, I want to do that. And, we might ride over a mountain pass in Japan, but if you live in Appalachia, well, the mountain pass is there too. So our goal is not to say you need to do something, travel to wherever, but more like, and that's why we don't publish often, route sheets and stuff like that, because we figure you're going to ride completely in a different place. But we want to inspire you, like, oh, we can do that. Just like we were inspired by those old French guys who, rode at night across mountain passes and wrote about the full moon and stuff. I thought, I want to do that.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm sure you guys will definitely continue to inspire. It sounds like you guys have really kind of shaped like a certain niche and generation of cyclists to embrace these bikes. So someone asked, this is kind of interesting. You talk a lot about tire choice. How about rim and wheel choice? Is there, do you see some rim wheel combinations that work better or that interface better with the tires that you guys use?
It's an interesting question. I think, especially with the wider tires, the tire is so flexible and the rim is so stiff that, again, the rim mostly matters if it doesn't work. Like if the tire blows off, if the tire doesn't seat correctly, if the wheel goes out of true. But with the modern tubeless ready rims, the tolerances are very tight. Otherwise, it just doesn't seal. So we're really lucky that, especially if you use tubes, which is kind of ironic, but if you use tubes on the tubeless ready rim, you're not going to have any problems with your wheels ever. And how to say, I think that's sort of the main thing. Some people think that the wider rim is better for wider tires. But when the tires get really supple, the sidewall flexes so much that it's not really supporting the tire that much. The original idea was if you have more U shape, you know, where the tire is like this, then the sidewalls are vertical and the bike stands on those sidewalls versus an O shape where it can more easily compress. But with a supple tire, it doesn't really matter that much. The extreme is a tubular, which basically has a 0 rim width because, you know, you have the tire on top of the rim. Still works great.
Yeah.
And, you know, no pro racer says, oh my gosh, I can't corner because my tubular tire and so on. You know?
Right.
You need to run a little higher pressure with the supple tires simply because the rubber doesn't hold up the tire. It's still more comfortable and still faster. But, you know, the extreme is a really stiff tire that even if you take the inner tube out, it still stands up. Like only when you sit on the bike does it actually compress and become flat.
Yeah. So let's take a tire that's 42 millimeters. Do you have like an ideal like rim width that you think interfaces best with that kind of tire width?
You know, I have 42s on a 20 millimeter wide with rim on my city bike in the front, and it doesn't seem to matter. And then I have 25 millimeter rims on another bike. It's not that important with our tires. I think aerodynamics, it probably matters, but then the aerodynamics of the wheel compared to the aerodynamics of the rider don't matter again. So, you know, it's again, if you have a tight fitting jacket, you gain way more than you would with an set of aero wheels. We tested that in the wind tunnel for bicycle.
Yeah. Nice.
No, I think the important part is not even the equipment so much. The equipment just enables us to do stuff. It's just like a hiker who has great hiking boots. When you meet them on the trail, they're not going to tell you about the hiking boots. Oh man, I have these, you know, there. No, they'll tell you, I saw a cougar back there.
Yeah.
And, you know, the sunrise was beautiful and this trail, you know, and it's tough going up the hill or something. And that's how I see the bike. Yes, the bike has to be really, really carefully thought out so that it doesn't limit you. You know, the worst thing that can happen is that, yeah, bad things happen to your bike on the trail. But even if the bike doesn't handle great or if it doesn't climb well, then you don't want to go in the mountains. And that's where the most beautiful riding is. Yeah. To me, it's really exhilarating when you look down into the valley and you say, wow, I came all this way. And it just feels great. You feel like like an eagle soaring on an updraft. And on the gravel road, you also have that little bit of slip between the tires and the wheel that sort of gives you a sense of freedom as you ride the bike, that it's not as prescriptive. Like on the road, you're either gripping or you're crashing. And on gravel, you're always sliding a little bit. And how much, you know, and so you play with the bike more. It's to me, it's really, really fun.
Well, I think I'm going to end the interview on that note. Thank you so much, Jan, for being on the show. And if you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. If you have any other further questions, leave those in the comments. And thank you. And definitely everyone check out Bicycle Quarterly if you're not already familiar with it. And thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks a lot for the interview. It's fun.
Yeah. Thank you once again for spending time with us and listening. And if you enjoyed the show and you discovered it via iTunes in your podcasting app, leave a rating, leave a review, and help the show out. And until next time, ride bikes, travel, and do good.